Good morning to all of you. I'm so very glad to be here. I can't even tell you. It's just really a very lovely thing to be up here this morning. But I do want to start by making a bit of a confession to you. The truth is, I have been in your shoes many times. I have sat out there while a guest speaker approaches the pulpit, and I will admit that certain questions tend to go through my mind when that happens. Things like, who is this guy? What if he talks for 45 minutes? What if he's boring? What if he talks for 45 minutes and he's boring? It does happen sometimes, but listen, really to put your mind at ease, I can tell you it wasn't that long ago that I took a week-long preaching class, and during that class, week-long, so it was 5 days, I calculated that at the end of that I had listened to 47 sermons. This morning you only have to listen to one. So you're lucky, right? That's something to be hopeful about. So we are talking about hope today, in case you hadn't figured that out, with all of our beautiful rainbow music and our lovely meditation this morning. And I believe we can find hope in all kinds of unlikely places. For instance, this bag of lentils right here. And we'll find hope in this jar. And I will explain more about that as we get further along. But I'd like to start today with a story that I will tell you is not an easy one to hear. I've adapted it from an article by Vivian Salama, and this article first appeared in The Atlantic. I've chosen it because it makes us uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable. And I believe we need to be in that place to really understand how integral hope is to building a better world. So as I tell the story this morning, I'd ask that you listen to it with an open mind and an open heart. It's a hot morning in May in the city of Ja'ar in South Yemen. Shopkeepers have opened their stores, children are ambling to school, the smell of food wafts through the streets of this small town. A goat nibbles on fruit at a market stall while a woman named Lowell looks on. Boom. The ground vibrates with the sound of this explosion, and voices immediately rise in distress. What is it? Where is it this time? Lowell joins the townspeople running through the dusty streets towards that deafening sound. She must find her 18-year-old son, Munir. Now, Lowell can't read, and she doesn't own a television, but Munir always knows what's going on. When a pile of rubble comes into view, a man drops to his knees saying, "Praise Allah, only one house this time." He gestures toward the untouched buildings that surround this rubble pile that had once been a house destroyed by a drone strike. The townspeople sift through the rubble, calling out, "Is anyone there?" There's no response. Hands grip Lowell's shoulders and she turns. It is Munir. "Go home," he says gently. "Too many people are here. I'll help them lift the heavy pieces." Gratitude washes over Lowell. Munir lives. She presses her hands to his cheeks. He nods, and then she begins the walk toward home. As she is just steps away, there is another deafening boom. It is a second missile, and in an instant, 24 people lie dead or dying. Lowell knows immediately that Munir is amongst them. Lowell says that now, without Munir, she cannot see. He was her eyes. She believes that Al-Qaeda is very bad, but her dreams are not haunted by it. Her dreams are haunted by American missiles. She knows nothing about American politics or people. All she knows is that her son is dead, and as far as she's concerned, they are responsible. They are criminals, she says. Criminals who stole her son. So, just a week ago, a US-led drone strike in Yemen killed at least 3 civilians and dozens of people possibly associated with Al-Qaeda. And just 3 days ago, U.S. senators removed a provision from a major intelligence bill that would have required public disclosure of information about the victims of drone strikes. But we're not going to talk about politics or even specifically drone strikes today. We're starting here in this difficult place because this issue, like so much that goes on out in the world, is ethically complex. It strains our ability to discern right from wrong, good from evil, the good people from the bad people. And that challenges our capacity to have hope. Yet the story of Lowell is simply one story going on in the world today, one tiny story about one person's loss in a place that most of us have never heard of before, called Ja'ar. But it's a loss that we, even if it's the results of our best efforts in decision-making, problem-solving, and diplomacy, and again, we're not here to argue today whether it is or isn't, because it's that loss that we need to recognize. Because when we're looking at the actions taken to combat problems in the world, whether it's war, terrorism, poverty, intolerance, we have to understand the ramification of those actions so we can demand better solutions. We can't look the other way. We need to feel the consequences. We need empathy. Yet there's so much out there in the world that needs to be fixed that we can get overwhelmed. And most of us have the luxury of disconnecting from the suffering in the world because most of us will still have a roof over our heads and food to eat even if we never lift another finger to work for justice. So that means we have to work extra hard from numbing ourselves to life's complexities and pain. True justice making requires us to let in those consequences, good and bad, of how we interact with others, so that we can understand the results of our actions. We have to allow ourselves to feel the pain of others far away, because that's the thing, that empathy is the thing that informs ethical decisions. But there is one huge problem with all of this. We human beings have a finite capacity for empathy. It's true. There is only so much pain we can let in before we simply shut down. Now, you may have allowed yourself to feel that story I just told you, but what if I spent the rest of this time telling you one more story like that after another? There would come a time very quickly where I certainly would check out, and I know you would check out, because it would be too much. We'd grow numb to those stories, like that one in Ja'ar. I got to tell you, it's funny, when I first read that story and I saw Ja'ar, which is spelled J-A-A-R, I kept seeing it as the word jar. Now, at first I tried to just put that out of my mind, but I kept feeling like I was being nudged towards something, however tenuous the connection at first seemed. And in this case, that similarity between the town Ja'ar and the word jar kept pushing me toward the story of my great-grandmother. When I think of Lowell in Ja'ar, I remember the sorrow I could see in my great-grandmother's eyes. But her eyes spoke of many other things too. Grandma's eyes were filled. They were filled with the images of a lifetime. Riding side saddle to a one-room schoolhouse in Kentucky, saying goodbye to friends in World War I, watching her son go away to fight in World War II, losing her husband during the turmoil of the Vietnam War, and watching both her children, adult children, succumb to cancer. Through it all, Grandma maintained this kind of mystifying, steadfast courage. During the Great Depression, for instance, and this is one of my favorite stories about her. It says so much about so many things. But she worked during the Great Depression in a department store, and they refused to employ married women. So she was forced to secretly marry the person who would become my great-grandfather. When she became pregnant, she was so fearful, and rightly so fearful of losing her job that she hid the pregnancy under her work smock. And then she went home Friday after a regular work week, gave birth to my grandmother on Saturday, and was back to work on Monday as though nothing had happened. And she kept that baby a secret all the years that she worked there. This was one seriously tough lady. When I was a kid, Grandma was in her 90s, living alone in an apartment filled with the mementos of a lifetime. In her bedroom, there was an old mahogany vanity top with perfume bottles and framed family pictures. And there was an old mason jar with a scratched lid. Now, it looked a lot like this jar, only I think it was a little bigger. This one has some slips of paper in it, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But Grandma's jar was filled with peanuts. I asked her about those peanuts one day. How come you never eat them? They're not there for eating, she said. They're there for looking at. I asked her why she'd want to look at a jar of peanuts. Good question, right? Well, she said, sometimes I get worried about the state of the world, but I sure do like President Jimmy Carter a whole lot. And Jimmy Carter likes peanuts, so I put those peanuts in my hope jar. What's a hope jar? I asked. Now, you got to know, Grandma wasn't one for being sentimental, so she looked a little embarrassed and cleared her throat. Well, a hope jar is a place you put something that gives you hope when things are rough. When things are bad, I look at those peanuts and it makes me feel better. You know, that idea of a hope jar has truly stayed with me my whole life. Here was my great-grandmother who had lost loved ones in one war after another, who'd survived cancer herself 3 times only to lose both children to it. And she could find hope in a jar of peanuts. What could be more simply profound than that? Of course, I've realized since then that we don't need an actual jar to have a hope jar. Our hearts and minds can be our hope jar, filled with the things in life that remind us of why life is worth living. So what does this have to do with empathy? Well, in order to let ourselves feel the complexity of the world's pain, we have to have a foundation of intentionally cultivated hope, so our hearts will grow both stronger and more vulnerable. This increased capacity for empathy becomes our ethical foundation as we wrestle with maintaining the motivation and perception required to make a positive difference in the world. We need hope to temper the weight of the pain that we carry through empathy, and we need that empathy to build equitable relationships and make good decisions when helping others. Now you're saying, but Jason, what on earth then do we put in these hope jars of ours? Now, I know there may still be a few diehard Jimmy Carter fans out there, so peanuts may work for you. But for the rest of us, finding evidence of hope can be more challenging. After all, we Unitarian Universalists, coming as we do from a long line of intellectual investigation and critical thinking, we know that a word like hope, as beautiful as it is, it's not a magic cure-all, any more than looking at a rainbow is. In order to be a foundation for empathy, we have to concretize hope. It can't be an abstraction. So, I put a few ideas about hope in this hope jar to give you some ideas of what you can fill yours with. So here goes. Some of you probably thought this was a tip jar when you first saw it. Just put that in the offering basket. Okay. So hope cherishes no illusions, nor does it yield to cynicism. This is a great place to start, because one of the biggest myths in the world today is that it is a rotten place. And sure, there is a lot wrong with the world, like we saw with Lowell and Jaar. But there is another way that we can look at the world. Steven Pinker's massive book is entitled The Better Angels of Our Nature, and in it he demonstrates that violence has declined significantly over the past few thousand years. But even more importantly, whether you look at war, murder, torture, or just about any other indicator of violence, get this, the present, right now, the time we live in is the most peaceful time in all of human history. Right now. Now, several reasons for this decline in violence point to empathy, including the increasing respect for a variety of voices like those of women and other traditionally marginalized groups, the growing emphasis on reason, which has helped people recognize that privileging one's own interest over others is often destructive, who'd have thought, and the rise of literacy and media, which has acquainted people with increasingly diverse perspectives, widening their circles of empathy. So recognizing the strides the human race has made away from violence is an example of dealing in reality without cynicism. We don't need illusions either. Hope finds beauty in the truth of the world we live in. And there is a lot of beauty here, folks. We have to look for it, and we have to put it in our hope jars. So what's in here next? Hope opens doors where despair closes them. Hope is specific and regards problems as opportunities. So we've already established the world is a better place than it's often given credit for. But that's not to say there aren't real problems out there. In rural India, for instance, there's been a problem with the availability of immunizations for children. So some well-meaning people set up a few clinics offering free vaccinations. Problem solved, right? What could go wrong? Well, for starters, nobody came. Now, just imagine for a moment yourself in the shoes of a rural Indian mother, a mother whose eyes flicker with that steady strength found in the eyes of my great-grandmother. Now, you've heard about this immunization thing, but you don't really understand it, and you don't have any practical way of finding out more about it. Plus, there's work to be done every day, meals to be cooked, and to take precious time to trudge a few miles away to this clinic where your child's going to cry as she's stuck with a needle seems like an annoying waste of time. Don't push it, the critics said. It'll take a few generations for the culture to shift. But the organizers didn't give up. They did what they should have done in the first place. They talked. They talked to the people they were trying to reach. They heard their concerns and asked them what would change the situation. And together, they came up with a plan. So simple. They'd offer this. A 2-pound bag of lentils cost just a few cents. A 2-pound bag of lentils for each child that was brought in for vaccination. Can you guess what happened? There is a line. There is a line to get into this clinic, to get that vaccination and get those lentils. And when those people went home to their villages carrying their lentils, other villagers felt encouraged to do the same. And a dire situation is turned around all because of some inexpensive bags of beans. Now, some critics call those lentils bribes, I call them cynical, but I contend these lentils represent hope for the people getting their children immunized. These lentils are tangible reminders of the nourishment of the body. And what could be a better, more valuable association for people who don't have access to comprehensive vaccination information, but do absolutely understand the practicalities of feeding a family? And I contend these lentils represent hope for us too. We find hope in the specificity of this solution. Hope in lentils. We see that this supposedly insurmountable problem, a problem that requires significant cultural and behavioral shifts, can be viewed as an opportunity to think outside the box, an opportunity to collaborate, an opportunity to be practical amidst the voices of naysayers, an opportunity to have hope when others are overwhelmed. And the solution is as simple as a bag of lentils. It could have been a jar of peanuts, like it was for my great-grandmother. Hope isn't found in lofty abstracts. Hope is found in the specific. We look for specific solutions to problems. We don't worry if those solutions are small, and we stick those solutions in our hope jars for inspiration. So what else is in here? Let's see. Okay. Hope comes from unexpected people and places. Hope looks for the good in people instead of harping on the worst in them. Well, I've never done that, have you? I think back to when I worked as a chaplain at a large hospital, going from room to room, offering comfort where I could. And let me tell you, I'll never forget room 1503. It was almost lunchtime, and my stomach was growling, but I figured I'd check on one more room and then go to lunch. After all, most of my patients that morning had been napping. Well, 78-year-old Ruth was not napping. She was sitting up in bed, the pink scarf at her neck contrasting with the drab hospital gown. Smiling, she gripped my hands in hers. "I've seen you around and knew you were a chaplain," she said. "You sure are the bright light I needed, honey." Ruth told me the doctor had told her that she didn't have a lot of time left. We talked for a while about her kids and grandkids, about the husband who died a few years before, about the garden where she raised tomatoes, and about queers. "It's the end of days, honey," she told me. "Satan is at work in the world, queers all around, actually getting married to each other, and then adopting those poor kids who have to share in their demonic lives." She shook her head and clucked her tongue while I sat there speechless. And let me tell you, I wished I'd just gone to lunch at that point, Stomach still growling, but... What was I, a gay man, to say to her? As a chaplain, I was supposed to explore spiritual concerns and offer comfort. How could I do that here when this woman believed in virtually everything I didn't and would likely despise me were she to know more about me? Now, I'll admit that I was tempted to harp in my own mind about what I saw as the worst in her. But wiser people than me have taught me that our best opportunity for changing minds is by changing hearts. And that has to do with taking time to understand even those, especially those people whose goodness may be hard for us to see. So there in that hospital room, I recognized that, like it or not, I was called to love this woman and offer her hope that she, unknown to her, was getting from an unexpected place, a gay man. So I stayed and I talked with her. And, it wasn't easy. I'm not a hero here with this. I couldn't let go of all of her previous words, but it was quickly evident that there were areas where we could relate, like the love she felt for her family or the fear she felt as she faced the reality of her failing body. And I'll tell you, in her eyes, at one point I saw the vulnerability I had seen in the eyes of my great-grandmother. When I left, Ruth told me again what a bright light I was. But surprisingly, she ended up lighting the way for me toward looking beyond the good or the bad to the good in others and appreciating unexpected wellsprings of hope. Through this unlikely loving encounter between two mismatched people, we both found hope. When we find hope where we least expect it, we need to be sure to note it and stick it in our hope jars. So we've got two more things left here in this jar. Now, if you're beginning to suspect this jar is rigged, you'd be right. Hope draws its power from a deep trust in God, nature, and or the basic goodness of humankind. Unitarian Universalists come from hope-filled traditions. Universalism said that despite our flaws, all humanity was worthy of salvation, of being reconciled with divine love. And Unitarianism didn't focus on the death of Jesus. It was what Jesus' life taught us about love. That's what mattered, and how we can become better people. As humanism came into our movement, it recognized the power in human potential, our ability to act right here on earth to make it a better place. Today we acknowledge that we're all worthy of earthly salvation, of better lives, of growing to be our best selves. We trust in the idea that we're all created worthy of respect and love. And in this sacred trust, combined with the awe and wonder that the vast, powerful, and mysterious universe provokes within us, we find the hope that is the source of all other hope. We have to believe in something, and we have to fill the empty spaces of our hope jars with that belief. We still have one final slip of paper left. What could it be? Hope discovers what can be done instead of grumbling about what can't be done. That's right. We people of rationality and liberal faith believe life is more than just survival. So it's not enough to simply remain drowning in grief in tough times. When we hear stories like that of Lowell and Munir, it can be tempting for us to switch off and numb ourselves to what's going on out there in the world. But if we've filled our hope jars to the brim, we'll have enough hope, not just for ourselves, but to share with others. In our jars will be the knowledge that the world we live in now, for all its wounds, is the most peaceful it has ever been, and that there are those who help when terrible events occur. We'll recognize that little things like peanuts and bags of lentils can be inspiration and even solutions to complex problems. We'll find hope in unlikely human connections, like a moment of unexpected grace between a frightened woman and a gay man. And we'll fill our jars with images of children and grandchildren, spouses and friends, those people that keep us going. When we have this foundation of hope, we'll be better equipped to empathize with those who appear different from us. And we'll act out of that empathy, demanding from our leaders behaviors and policies that are ethical, that are geared toward peace, that embrace the full complexity of the spectrum of people's lives. For that is what true justice making is about. And I've got news for you too. This is our great work, folks. This is why we're here. To recognize our inextricable connection to each other, that we are one in spirit. I know this because I have seen the sorrow of my great-grandmother in Lowell and Ja'ar, the strength of my great-grandmother in the Indian mother taking her child to the vaccination clinic, and the vulnerability of my great-grandmother in Ruth in that hospital room. She is in all those people, just as I am, just as you are. We are all one, and we must learn to act accordingly. It's a big task, but I have hope. We can make the world a better place. I have hope because my grandma taught me to fill my hope jar. And so my question to you today is, what will you put in your hope jar? This moment together of connection and community is the perfect place to start. This is yours to take with you. And beyond that, the sky's the limit. Our hope jars should be as wide and as big as our hearts and minds can make them. Our hope jars should be as vast and colorful as the rainbow, long a symbol of hope, with the jar's bottom just as elusive as the end of that rainbow. Thanks, Grandma, for sharing your hope jar with us. We promise that our hope jars and their contents will never stop growing, and neither will our hearts. May we never forget to gaze with awe and wonder on the beauty and possibility of the world we live in. May we treasure it, nurture it, and hold each other through the movement of time and space. Amen.